We can get Patty to sit down back there. Okay, well, those of you who are first timers, welcome to the Capital Area World War II Roundtable. We're continuing with our monthly effort to have a World War II veteran speak to us. And tonight we do have another World War II veteran here. Frank Grady is his name. He's a former member of the 28th Infantry Division. He went in with them when they went in about 7 weeks after D-Day?
Yes.
About 7 weeks after D-Day, landed on Omaha Beach.
That's correct.
And he fought through the Battle of the Hedgerows, Siegfried Line campaign, and then the Hurtgen Forest, which he picked over here in this painting.
Oh, isn't that good? Yeah.
And anyway, Frank was wounded there, but I don't want to take your thunder, Frank. I'll let you talk.
You can make my speech if you want.
So, Frank Grady.
Okay, thanks very much. You might want to hold that applause because after I finish speaking, you might not be so enthusiastic. I'm only kidding, of course. What I wanted to add to that introduction was you're getting more for your money than you realized tonight, because I'm not only a World War II vet, but I was in the Civil War too. Think that one over. That would make me like 138 years old or something like that. Anyhow, but use that line, and very few people take it very seriously. I'll guarantee you that. First of all, I did show this picture to some of the early arrivals, and I'll pass it around here. The heading under the picture is "Women Waiting for the Perfect Man." Now, what these women are all skeletons. They've been waiting so long for the perfect man, they turned into a skeleton. I got this from Greg Sutliff the other day, and I think it's funny and interesting. But of course, many of you wives that are here in the audience are probably thinking, hey, I got the perfect man. I didn't have to wait that long. I got the perfect man. But I'm sure you don't want to stand up and, and recognize that. But at any rate, I also wanted to point out a few things at the outset here. I was at a meeting at the Hershey Lodge on Monday of this week. I don't know if any of you happen to have been there, but the Commandant, General Ivany, I-V-A-N-N-Y, was there, and he and I had quite a bit in common. I knew some colonels who were over at the War College, and he, being the Commandant, happened to know the people that I referred to. So I'll pass this on. I think it's very interesting. He gave me this medallion. It's a beautiful thing. Fred, if you'd pass it around, I'd appreciate it. Yeah, yeah. Now that leads me into the fact that I did have the privilege and the honor of speaking at the War College. What they do, you may know, since they're all colonels, approximately like colonels or full colonels, they're there to study various subjects of warfare. So the day that I was there, the subject was the Hurtgen Forest. And they wanted a real live example, namely yours truly, because I was in the Hurtgen Forest. I got wounded in the Hurtgen Forest, as Bill said, so I knew quite a bit about the facts of the warfare under those conditions. And I spent several hours with this group of colonels, some generals, and some foreign leaders as well. There was a German high-ranking officer in the group, and another one from France, I believe. That was when we were on good terms with France. And it was an interesting experience for me, and I hope for them. Now, when I met the general on Monday, he said, "Frank, we're going to have you back again." So I said, "General, but could I get an increase this time in my fee?" he said, yeah, we're going to double it. So, well, how do you double nothing? But I did it because I wanted to enjoy it. I wanted to be a part of it, and I wanted to see how they conducted their sessions, and I was honored, I thought, you know, to be invited to begin with. So now I've got a book that I've written. Unfortunately, I only have 2 copies left. 200 were printed in 2002. I did this in approximately a year and a half, took part of 2000, most of 2001, and then we got it into print in 2002. There were many, many times in the course of putting this together. I'm 82, maybe a number of you out there are as old as that as well, so it's not easy to get facts together, to get a coherent storyline, to be able to cover all the features that you want to try to cover in a book at our age. But I was very pleased to be able to finish it. My wife was very helpful. She'd say to me, will you finish that book and get that junk out of here? Because I had all kinds of papers and all kinds of materials, and I have to admit I cluttered up the house quite a bit in the process of writing the book. But I wrote it myself, didn't have a ghostwriter, as some books are put together, and I was pleased with the product. And I ordered 50 more just the other day. It would be ready by the time of our next meeting, I'm sure. So what we did here in putting this book together was to begin first with an introduction. The book is dedicated to my wife, and incidentally, many of you maybe have the same situation. My wife was a Navy nurse. She's a veteran too. And she spent her Navy nursing out on the West Coast. I told Fred she was at North Island in San Diego. Did you raise your hand? Excuse me, I didn't know. The lady in red there. Oh, okay, I didn't know if you had a question. But at any rate, my wife did a good job out there in the hospital that she was assigned to, working with casualties from the Pacific. And it's not uncommon, but it's not too common that some of us have married veterans. So we have a lot in common. My wife, as I said, is a nurse, and with my health over the past few years deteriorating at times, she's had more nursing experience at home than she wanted to have or bargain for. But we've been married 54 years, and we'll be married 55 years in September. My wife keeps adding after that, if we make it, it'll be 55 years. There are times when she and I both doubt that we're going to make it from the standpoint, you know, the little things crop up. No husband is perfect, like the picture I have, the woman waiting for the perfect man. It takes a lifetime to find that perfect man. So I always tell my wife that that's the case with me too. I never purported to be the perfect man, and she agrees. You certainly didn't. So anyhow, I got pictures here too that I'll pass around at a given time of the 40 and 8 experience that I had after being wounded. That's jumping ahead of the story, but after being wounded, I ultimately was taken on the back of a Jeep with a litter packed on the back of a Jeep to Liège, Belgium, and there a hospital train was being assembled. And I thought, of course, it would be a traditional type train. Instead, it was boxcars that were used to transport cattle around Europe. So you can imagine how hygienically imperfect they were. But what they did was take the litters of all the casualties that were taken from a field hospital down to the waiting area in a terminal in Liège. And then when the train got assembled, then we were taken out, and they would take the litters and literally throw them on racks on the boxcars. Then they put a nurse, a single nurse on each boxcar, closed the double doors, and away we went. And I'll make more of that story at a later date. But these are good pictures here. They came from a colonel friend of mine in Carlisle, knowing I had this experience. His father was a general, and in fact, it says back of the picture from the collection of Major General Hugh Foster from Furlong, Pennsylvania. So these are authentic pictures, and I didn't have these at the time the book was being put together. Otherwise, I would have been able to include them because they're very graphic and they're very, very helpful. So anyhow, I told you I think that the book was written between something like 2000 and 2002. And also, it was dedicated to my wife and our 8 grandchildren. So they are talented, and I want to give them credit at the outset. I also have a letter in the book, a copy of the letter, that was sent by General of the Army George Marshall to General Cota, C-O-T-A. Those of you who may be acquainted with the 28th Division might know that General Cota was the commanding general of the 28th Division. What was interesting about the letter, now this General of the Army, he was also included in the heading of the War Department. We didn't have a Defense Department in World War II, as you know. We had a War Department. We made we didn't belittle the fact or make no bones about the fact that we were a War Department in those days. Now we try to portray ourselves as a Defense Department because theoretically we don't start a war, we merely defend ourselves. But that letter is very interesting. When one general writes to another, General Marshall opened up the letter with, "Dear Cota," you know, not General Cota or any title like that at all, but just "Dear Cota." After all, he was Cota's superior. So he just made it very simple and direct. But that's an interesting part of the opening part of this, this book. The 28th Division, as you may know, is there anybody here from the 28th? Okay. Anyhow, the 28th Division states that it was, and it's authentic, the oldest continuous division in the United States Army. That's the oldest continuous. There may be something like an older division in some way, but they claim the title of the oldest continuous division in World War II. Now, I was in fact, I tried to keep the personal pronoun out of the book. There's hardly any place where the personal pronoun I is used. I prefer to use the writer or we, if possible, because those of you who were part of the service in whatever capacity know that World War II was hardly a single responsibility of anybody. I mean, we had to work together, we had to be part of teams, and therefore, as individuals, I'd recognize myself as being a small portion of what I thought was the biggest thing I'd ever seen in my whole born days. I was 22 when I was in the service, and I came out of college. I enlisted in an Army Reserve unit at Holy Cross College in Worcester, Massachusetts, and that was in '42. And then when the war in Europe and the potential of a war in the Pacific loomed, they activated all the college reserve units. And I wound up first in the Quartermaster Corps for a while at Fort Lee in Virginia. So the way the Army classifies people is a very interesting process, because they put me in as qualified to attend a cook school. I didn't even know how to boil an egg. I didn't hardly know how to boil water. But whatever system they used, I wound up in a cook school, and there's a humorous aspect to that. The first day I had in this kitchen was a very portly, rather good-sized gentleman who was the chief cook. And he said, "Soldier, we're going to teach you how to mash potatoes, how we do it in the Army." I thought that ought to be interesting. So he threw these hot boiling potatoes into a big vat, and then he had a tremendous plunger. And he would go down into those potatoes, and the steam would come up. And there I was watching him, and the perspiration was dripping all over his head, down into the potato. So anyhow, I said, "What are we going to do with them now, Chief?" And he said, "What we're going to do now is serve them to the troops. They're coming in for a meal." He said, "I want you to help serve them. You take charge of the potatoes." It almost made me sick to think of what I was going to do. So as the GIs came through the line, they said, "Hey, how about, let's have some more of those potatoes." I said, "Fine." So those who wanted them, I heaped their plates with potatoes. But knowing how they were cooked, I wouldn't eat any myself, of course. But that was my first experience in the kitchen, and it was a very interesting one. I wanted to get out of cook school as quickly as I could. So what happened there was I was given a test, because I had 2 years of college before I went into service. And I qualified for a program called the Army Specialized Training Program. Anybody hear of it? Yeah, there it is. ASTP. You're right. Correct. Yes. Yeah. So I ultimately got assigned to the University of Pennsylvania from Fort Lee, and there they gave us a choice of languages that we could study. I had a little proficiency, French and Latin in my background. So anyhow, they gave me the choice, as they did other GIs as well, of Japanese, Chinese, Hindustani, all kinds of languages, and Russian. Well, I thought to myself, maybe I should study Russian. It might have some value, both in the service, if we link up with the Russians, which was the rumor at the time. If in Europe we got to that point, we might link up with them. Or possibly later in life, it might be helpful to know Russian. So I spent the better half of 2 to 3 semesters at the University of Pennsylvania studying Russian. It's a very difficult language. Those of you who might be acquainted with it would know that many of the letters, let's take a C for example, is the same in Russian, but it's pronounced as if it were an S. And an M, I think, had a line over it. That was pronounced, I think, as a T, T-E-H. So you had to constantly, if you were trying to read the language, keep in mind the difference between what looked like a C to us or what looked like an M to us and what it meant in the Russian language. So we had a professor who was very, very good. He put us in a group of GIs. Then he'd ask us to pronounce certain words. And if we did it right, he would light up. Oh, he would get all excited. Oh, ho, 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 that's so wonderful that we could pronounce that particular word. But what we did was, there was an experiment at the time. I don't know what colleges are doing now. But at that time, they were teaching us the Russian language in the fashion of how a baby learns its native tongue. In other words, not bothering with grammar, not bothering with the fundamentals of the meaning of the words and so forth, but just learning the words and then trying to converse as much as we could. And it was very, very difficult. But then at that time, those of you who know anything about ASTP, it was something like 250,000 students throughout the United States in various colleges studying engineering, languages, and other subjects that the Army thought might be useful to them. So what we constituted was a big reservoir of people. And when they decided that things might heat up in Europe, things would get rough in the Pacific. They dissolved all of the ASTP programs. Most of us, I guess 90% of us, wound up in infantry basic training camps. So it was a rude jolt to come from a college life to basic training where the top sergeant, as you know, those of you who are into it, where the top sergeant is your lord and master. And that was tough to get used to, plus the discipline, plus the rugged physical training. At the time, I didn't personally appreciate all that training and all that physical training. We climbed up over barriers, and we took forced marches, sometimes running with full packs on our backs. But when I got to Europe, I realized how wonderful that physical training was, because it made us almost immune from any pneumonia, like sitting in a foxhole, like many of you did too. We were wet most of the time. It was raining or snowing, and we had a shelter half over our heads and bodies, but that shelter half would do nothing more than accumulate water. Then you'd move your shoulder or move your head, and the whole damn bucket of water would get right in the hole with you. So we were cold and wet most of the time, but on the other hand, I didn't even have a sniffle. When I got home, if I forgot my rubbers, got my feet wet, I'd have a cold. But that's where the physical training really helped, because we were in such good physical shape. The only thing that did happen to many GIs was trench foot. They say, like in the month of November of 1944, there were more GIs lost to combat through trench foot than from any bombs or bullets that came from the enemy, because the trench foot was so easy to acquire with all the moisture in your shoes, and you were wet all over and so forth, and the trench foot thing just disabled a number of soldiers. I was fortunate to avoid that, but on the other hand, it was rampant at that time. So after they got through with that training, basic training, then we were mobilized into combat teams. It turned out that we were actually replacements, and we went by troop ship from the United States to Europe. And that troop ship was a very interesting experience. I was advised as I got on the ship to make sure you get a top bunk, because the lower bunks, when the weather got rough, seasickness took over. And if you were on a lower bunk, you had GIs over you getting sick, and it could all wind up on you. So I took that advice, and I got an upper bunk, and I saw the value of the location when I saw all the seasickness that took place. You got a hand up back there? No? Okay, all right. Anyhow, that was quite an experience. We landed in England. We went to no-name. They didn't tell us anything. Everything was so secret. We went to a no-name camp. I don't even know now. We were never let out of it. What the name of the camp was, or where it was really in England. It was no picnic, I know that, because we were still engaged in some training and some calisthenics, and the almost daily inspections and so forth. This was first before D-Day, and then we thought maybe we would be included in D-Day. It never got to that point. They would take GIs out mysteriously, and I think a lot of them wound up in the landings. But as Bill Jackson pointed out, I think our unit didn't go in until several weeks after D-Day. But we did land at Omaha Beach, and we did have some skirmishes in the hedgerows, and a lot of the travel through France was either by truck or by staying in units and trying to take care of pockets of resistance that were left when our original troops went through France so fast that they bypassed a lot of Germans, but they were still there and still capable of conducting a little fight from time to time. So then approximately at the Siegfried line, our combat team joined the 28th Infantry Division. So I wound up in Company G, 109th Infantry. I was a bazooka man. You know, maybe the bazooka is an anti-tank weapon. To talk about that for a minute, I met a corporal recently in the Marines, and I was telling him that I had the responsibility of the bazooka. He said, "Hey, now we call that the javelin." I said, "Oh yeah? What's that like?" He said, "That's computer designed so that the GI who's carrying the bazooka has a computer. And he punches out the numbers, he gauges the distance that the tank might be from where he is. And he made a lot of calculations. Then finally, the last button he pushed released the javelin as a shell. And this corporal said to me, "Oh," he said, "that javelin shell hits a tank." He said, "It destroys it, absolutely destroys it." And that was our fear and our worry, was that the bazooka was not that effective. And of course, no computers were involved at all. It was all by guess and by gosh, calculation to determine when to fire it and how to fire it. In fact, the day that I got wounded in the left arm, we had taken the ground that we were occupying in a firefight the night before. So the Germans came back en masse at 5 o'clock the following morning. Now, if you want to be awakened in a rude and crude manner, get yourself surrounded by enemy when you just wake up. I mean, it was really chaos. Oh, they surprised the heck out of us that they came in so quickly with the firepower that they had. So the captain came over to my foxhole and he said to me, "Grady, get your bazooka. See that tank coming in the distance?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I want you out of the hole, get the bazooka lined up, and knock out that tank." I said, "Thanks for the assignment, Captain." That was interesting. So anyhow, I got the bazooka on my shoulder. I was holding it. My arm is disabled here, so but I was holding the bazooka, and my guy, one of my cohorts, had the shell. He was getting ready to put the shell in. It was a real load firearm, if you remember it or know it. So I was getting all set to get that tank. You had to wait until the tank got to a fairly close distance, because there were several problems if you didn't calculate when to do it at the right time. First of all, if you missed the tank, all you did was notify the enemy where you were, and they could turn the turrets right on you. So you had to make sure that you got the tank, I'd call it, in the belly of the tank. That was where it was most vulnerable. But I never got to that point. Now, if any of you have been hit by a bullet, you might know. But what happened to me was, I got hit in the left elbow, but it was as if someone took my right arm and hurled me around in a circle. I mean, the force from that bullet to my anatomy was really something. I mean, it was, so I immediately tried to hold my arm in such a way to protect it, and some of my buddies came over and put a tourniquet on, as the blood was just gushing, practically gushing out at the time. So the captain came back to me and he said, because we went through the firefight, and after the firefight subsided, and we knocked off the enemy had us outnumbered, but we kept after them and knocked them out of the position they were in. And then he said to me, "Now, hate to put it this way, but you're not going to be any good to us anymore with this wound, of course. He said, and I can't spare anybody to take you back of the lines to where you can get medical attention. He said, what I got to do is tell you the direction. See that open field? I said, yeah, Captain. He said, you got to go to that empty field, but he said, I must warn you that the enemy has a good view. I said, thanks a lot of what you were going to go through there. And of course, he said they could hit you again. I said, any other messages before I leave, Captain? He said, no, that's enough for now. But he said, if you get to that island of woods, just beyond that, he said, there are corpsmen or medics going through that woods, trying to identify casualties and take them back for medical care. So I said, okay, all right. I went through that field all doubled up with loss of blood and weakness of my whole body from the standpoint of what I had been through, and got through the field. Then there was a roadway, dirt road, on the edge of the forest that I was supposed to be headed for. So what I could see on the road were the telltale mounds of mines. And I thought to myself, oh, that's all I have to do now is step on one of those, and I'm oblivion. So I didn't even pick my way across. I just rushed across the road, got into the woods. And maybe you know that a woods that's been fought over, shell fire knocks down trees, makes a jungle out of what might have been a decent forest prior to the hostilities that took place there. So I'd go under a branch and over a branch, and yelling all the while about Army medics. Is there an Army medic here? You know, that kind of thing. So I don't know, several hours went by that I can recall now. And I fell down through sheer exhaustion and the loss of blood and so forth. And I imagine I must have sort of passed out. So I don't know how long I was there. And all of a sudden I turned over once and looked up, and these medics said, hey, GI, we can take you back to medical care. Ready to go? I said, yeah, sure as hell am. I don't want to lie here any longer. So they put me on the back of carried me back in a litter, put me on the back of a Jeep, took me to a battalion aid station, and there I got a shot of plasma, and that brightened my appearance, apparently. I must have looked very ashen prior to that. So then they took me from there to on the back of a Jeep to a tent hospital, a 28th Division tent hospital, where the casualties for the day, for the division, were being assembled in that tent to receive the medical care that they needed. So as they wheeled me into that tent, I'll never forget the scene in all of my born days. There were casualties, several hundred probably, I didn't count them, but several hundred in that tent who had been hit in some fashion or another during the course of the day's fighting. And a lot of the guys were delirious, yelling and screaming with pain, and several were so delirious they were saying things like, get me out of this GD place. I'm sorry, but that sort of language is used at times when you got enough pain and you got enough discomfort. Get me out of this place. I told my buddy back in the field I'd go back and get him. He's waiting there for me. And of course, the nurse said to me, that man isn't going to move from here, of course, but she said, he's so badly wounded, we're going to have to take off one of his legs. So that was the kind of scene, and that was the kind of screaming and yelling that took place in that big tent. It's a scene, as long as I live, I'll never forget it. But to make a long story short, they sedated most of us, and then by midnight that night, the initial wounding took place at 5 o'clock in the morning, but by midnight that night, they had us all sedated, quieted down, and sometime during the night, I think I had an operation, and then the next morning at daybreak, those of us who could be moved were taken to where I was earlier tonight, to the train terminal, and they put the litters in the train terminal until the hospital train got assembled. When they got us on the hospital train in the boxcars, then they took us to Paris, where there were ambulances waiting, and the idea was we were taken to French hospitals that had been taken over by our own arm, by the United States Army. And I went to one. I had some sort of like a traveling cast on, and in an operating room, a doctor came over to me and he said, "Fella, GI, we're going to take care of that arm now." And I said, "Please, doctor, don't drop the arm. It feels like it's going to fall off." He laughed and he said, "Yeah, I'll tell you what's wrong." He said, "You are right now losing a lot of blood and have lost a lot of blood." And then he said, beyond that, he said the nerve damage in the arm has caused a lack of circulation. I'll never forget these words as long as I live. But he said to me, "I think we can save the arm." Whew. I didn't know how close I came to losing the arm. At any rate, he said, "We can do that." I felt thrilled over that, naturally. So we were taken from there. I had a body cast put on there for travel purposes. And we were taken to one of the Parisian airports where the Army had assembled planes, hospital planes. And then we had to wait in the airport terminal. They put all the litters around the waiting area on the floor. In those days, naturally, there was no radar, no sonar, no other means of calculation as to how the weather was, so they had to wait for the weather to clear. And then the planes, after several days of that waiting, could move on to flight status, and they took us to, those of us I was with anyway, they took us to England. And there we wound up in, the group I was with, wound up in a hospital, a converted children's hospital in Bristol, England. And then I was in this cast, but I must admit, they gave us some liberty. But you know, it was very difficult to make love to the English girls with this cast. I mean, there was no way I could handle that at all. But I tried as much as I could anyway. So anyhow, we were there for several months, and then we went to one of the ports in England, and they had hospital ships. I happened to be transported back to the United States on a hospital ship called the Wisteria. And that was a converted, it was the Grips home at one time. It was a converted repatriation ship, I think, but had big red crosses on it and all kinds of lights all over it. And so we were taken back to Charleston, South Carolina. There we received some more hospitalization, and then I happened to travel at that point back to my hometown area, which was Massachusetts. To make a long story short, then I was discharged. I was hit in November of '44, and I was discharged after all the hospitalization in July, I think it was, of '45. So that's pretty much the story that the book has here. Now, what I'd like to do, if I could ask someone to help me with this, distribute these pictures, which I think are very graphic, and not all of you get a chance to see them. They're either loading ships or pictures of the GIs, not ships, boxcars. So, maybe would you take it? Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. So that was my experience, except I've left out a few things that are in the book. The first one is a Western Union telegram that my parents received when I was wounded. Now, this was addressed to the parents, and it read this way: "Regret to inform you your son was seriously wounded in action in Germany. 5 November. Until new address is received," to quote Private First Class, my name, "hospitalized, and a central postal directory in New York was the destination of the mail, then they were to advise my parents of what condition I was in. Now, boys delivered telegrams. Maybe some of you older folks would realize that in those days, in the 40s, telegrams were delivered by boys either on bicycle or on foot to the homes of parents, for example, some with the news that their son had died, was killed in Europe, or, as mine said, seriously wounded. So that's quite a treasure anyway, to have a copy of the telegram, which I have framed at home. Then got a picture of the hospital ship in here, and the rules and regulations of the hospital ship on travel from Europe back to the States again. So a lot of that stuff might be interesting, you know, that is in the book. Now I'd like to open it up if any of you have questions, suggestions, or your own experiences.
Jack?
Yeah, please.
When you joined G Company,
Yes.
109th Infantry,
That's correct.
were you acquainted with at all with Private Eddie Slovic, or had he already left the unit?
Well, I'll tell you, it was so confusing. I knew the guys, some of them, in the unit I was assigned to within Company G, but warfare naturally is so chaotic that to know anybody else in the company was virtually impossible. No, I can't tell you that I did. Yep.
He was the one, Frank, that was shot for desertion.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
And he was from G Company 109.
is that right? Oh, gee,
He was
thank you for
shot
bringing
for
that to my
desertion.
attention. I didn't know that.
He was the only GI, I believe, Jack.
The only GI
The
who
ETO
was shot for desertion after court martial.
Wow.
28.
Yes.
You know, we were advised that anybody running from combat could subject himself or herself, himself rather. Now we got women in combat, but we didn't then. But subject himself to being shot by our own troops. The slogan was that the spirit of the jungle prevailed, and that if anybody ran, you're entitled to shoot them. I didn't happen to see any, or see any deserters or people leaving the front lines, but I did have an experience that I think might be interesting. When we took we broke through the Siegfried line, we took a pillbox in a fierce firefight, and then we drove the Germans out, and then we occupied that pillbox that night. So the pillbox was pretty well equipped with almost a small kitchen-like arrangement and bunks, I would estimate, for 15 or 20 occupants. So our little unit went in there, and we spent the night there that night. And the guy below me announced to all of us, he said, "I'm not going out there tomorrow." So we all laughed and said, "Come on, you know, none of us want to go out there, but we have to. It's our duty and our responsibility." And the guy kept repeating it, that he wasn't going out there. I had a pretty good idea what he meant, but I wasn't sure. Make a long story short, the next morning, a sergeant came into the doorway and he said, "Guys, out of the bunks, on the floor, all your equipment on, you're going back out to the foxholes." So we all dutifully put on our equipment, got ready to go. So 5 or 10 minutes later, the sergeant came back and he said, "Okay, guys, hit it. I want everybody out here, out this door." So again, this guy was still sitting on the edge of his bunk. And I thought, hey, it's not my responsibility. So we all dutifully went out. And as we got out the door of the pillbox, we heard a shot go off, and then a lot of screaming and yelling with pain. What this man had done was shot himself in the foot. So that was a non-solution. What that meant for him, the Army would take care of it. That was the humane thing to do. So the Army took care of those who did that kind of thing, but it was an automatic dishonorable discharge. Now, who in this room would ever want to be living through an experience after service with a dishonorable discharge? Now, in the many hospitals that I was in, the rumor would be in an occasional situation, bed number 12 is an SIW. See, he was branded. The SIW was self-inflicted wound. So, as I said, the Army took care of them, but as I said, their life practically was ruined. And I saw this happen and realized what. Now, I can't castigate the guy too much from this standpoint. But he had fought with us to the point where we were subjected to a lot of conflicts from the standpoint of knowing full well there was a good possibility of dying in the field. You never knew, as we were in foxholes, you never knew whether one of those mortar shells was going to land in the hole you were in. Now, there's a lot of stress in that thought, but we could hear the Germans drop the mortar shell in the tube. It made a unique noise, and we were so skilled we could count the seconds that it would take for that shell to get where we were. So when the shell landed near the hole and dirt splashed in on us, we were never so glad to see dirt, because that meant that it wasn't going to trouble us. But if the mortar shell landed in the hole, all that was left for us to consider was they would come along with shovels and shovel the body pieces into a body bag and ship that home. Here's your relative. That's all that's left that we have. Now, that puts a lot of stress on an individual. You can imagine how you'd feel about that. So this guy just had it up to here, I guess. He couldn't stand the battle conditions any longer. Now, I'd like to take that back to the picture, Pat. You all saw that picture probably. Yeah, it was a very interesting picture. There was a scene in the moving picture where Patton is in a tent congratulating some Purple Heart winners, and those who ordered the Purple Heart. And then it was congratulating him, and he saw a guy at the end of the tent with his head in his hands. And he said to somebody, "What's wrong with that guy?" And they said, "Oh, General, he's just combat weary. He can't go out and take any more combat." The general said, "What? Give me my gloves," to his aide. He went down to the guy and said, "What's your excuse?" The guy said, "General, I can't take it anymore." He said, "Those brave men up at the other end of the tent, you ought to be ashamed of yourself to be in the same tent with them." And he took the gloves and slapped the guy across the face. Now, he got reprimanded, apparently, for being as tough as he was. But on the other hand, that was a symbol of the kind of emotional problems that occurred with some guys who just couldn't take it any longer. It was just too much for them to be able to withstand. That's what happened to my illustration. And the question about that the man brought up back there of the deserter in the 28th. As well as I know a lot of 28th Division history, I don't think they probably don't want to repeat that or give that much coverage. It isn't a shining example of what those of the 28th Division did. That's for certain. Anybody else with any other question? Any else? Fred?
One thing, Frank, you said you spent some time studying Russian.
Yes.
Did you ever have a chance to use it during the period of combat you were in?
No, because we never linked up with the Russians, Fred. I don't know of any. I'm sure some of our units did at some point, but I never had the occasion. And if I did, I probably would stumble through that Russian, so no Russian would ever understand me trying to speak his language.
All right, I won't embarrass you now because I don't know if anybody else speaks Russian. Give us one sentence in Russian.
Okay. Союз Soviet Socialistiski Ruski. That's not a sentence, but it's a series of words. It means the United States, when it was before communism, the United States of Soviet Russia is what that means. But it's so difficult for us with the English language to wrap our tongues around those harsh words. I mean, it's really difficult to speak Russian. And I have the dictionary at home, but that reminds me of a trip my wife and I took one time to Canada, French Canada, Quebec, I think we were at the time. We went into a restaurant, and they had valet parking, so I pulled the car over and I rushed up to the guy that was doing the valet parking, and I tried to speak French to him. And the guy said to me in perfect English, "Mister, I can't understand that French, but what I can understand is English. Please speak English to me." My wife reminds me of that as often as she can, because it was so difficult to carry on a foreign language where other people so conversant and know it so well for him. I think the idea of studying Russian was probably a good one, and I might have been able to fake it through if I did have to do some Russian, but it would be difficult to carry on any meaningful conversation. Anybody else with any other question of any kind or suggestion?
I'm just curious,
Sure.
how much training did they give you on the bazooka?
Okay, as a matter of fact, the training they gave me was when I joined the 28th Division. They said, "Here's the bazooka. Do the best you can. Do the best you can." You know, they also called the bazooka an Aberdeen, that's where it was made, Aberdeen, Maryland, an Aberdeen rocket launcher. But, yeah, that was about the training that I got. And I used it, but I honestly can't say how successfully I used it. I think I might have knocked out a tank or two during some of the battles that we were in, but it was a difficult weapon.
I agree.
To use, yes.
It was like trying to fire a Roman candle out of a stovepipe.
Yeah. You know, there's some statements that I have in here in the book. One of them is Murphy's Law. First of all, it says, remember that the weapon you're using was made by the lowest bidder. And there are a few more of those that are like that are pretty good, I think. Just a second. Oh, by the way, the book is at the United States Library of Congress, the Military Institute over at the War College, and Frederickson Library. And also there's a living memorial series on the www.com living memorial out of the Smithsonian, I think, where the book went into that. And anyhow, it was the experience of a lifetime, one I'll never forget as long as I live. If anybody doesn't have anything else, then I'll conclude with thanking you for your kind attention here. Oh, we do have another hand back there. Yes, sir.
You mentioned a movie. I thought maybe think about Saving Private Ryan. Did you ever see that?
Oh, yes, I did.
Where
Oh,
you talked
yeah.
About the bad language in the tent. I was wondering if you thought the language in Private Ryan was authentic, or if you thought it was for the modern moviegoers.
Well, to tell you the truth, what I saw of Private Ryan, I thought was a miraculous reproduction of combat conditions. I forget who the producer of the film was, but boy, he really did an excellent job. In the theater I was in, I could almost feel like blood was running down the aisles. It was so authentic. I mean, it was really very well done. There are some Hollywood movies that we have to laugh at because they make combat look like one big social occasion. GIs riding around in jeeps, dating French women and having big parties. I don't know anybody who was in combat who ever saw anything resembling, those conditions. But Saving Private Ryan, I thought, you must have seen it as a picture, did you? Did you see the picture?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what'd you think of it?
Well, I was asking you about the language. You thought
Oh, the language. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, God, yes. Oh, yeah. I wouldn't, in the mixed company in the room, want to repeat some of the language that goes with combat, but it's realistic, and they produced it in a very realistic manner. They really did. Yeah.
Frank, I can add something to that.
Sure.
Dick Winters, our speaker last month, is a friend of mine, and he told me that when he went out to see the Rushes on Band of Brothers, when they were first doing it, he was appalled. He said, there's too much of the F word. He said, we never used it that much. And he asked them to take it out, and they did.
Oh, yeah. Well, you have to remember, these men are under stress in combat. They're letting off steam and using epithets that they normally might not use, but seem to be characteristic of the occasion and the conditions under which they were serving. So I wouldn't be surprised at any salty language. Right, Fred? Yeah. Oh, gee, yeah. Well, again, you
Question.
Yes, sir.
When you joined the 109th
Yes.
Infantry, was it already in the Hurtgen Forest, or was it still in the Schnee?
No, we were right at the Siegfried line.
Okay.
Yep. You see, there's a good point from this aspect. The forest picture that I can see from here, you said that is
That's
a
a
depiction of the Hurtgen Forest?
On the Battle of the Call Trail,
Oh, yeah.
near Schmidt and Comerside.
You see, the trees were planted so close together that even in daylight, the sun could hardly penetrate those trees. Sometimes it was so dark, you could be standing near a man and not even know he was there. I mean, it was, in fact, the Hurtgen Forest is considered to be the worst military blunder of World War II. And I'll tell you why that's the case. The Hurtgen Forest itself was not worth the battle. The ground was of no value to us, and to fight in the Hurtgen Forest was almost impossible. We couldn't get artillery shells out. It would hit a tree and cause our own destruction, for one thing. Then tanks, it was muddy as all get out too, and tanks with the closely packed trees and the mud couldn't get through the Hurtgen Forest. The Germans were surprised as all hell. We even wanted to fight over it and in it. They never expected that, because there was a situation in the Ruhr Valley that some of you historians may be aware of, where there were big dams. And if they blasted those dams, they could have flooded the area. We could have died that way, and all of our equipment could have been disabled if they let those dams spread out all over where the Hurtgen Forest was. So the important aspect was to fight for the Ruhr Valley. That would have been the place for the combat to occur. We lost, in some history books I read now, we lost all the advantages we had in going through France. We could use our tanks, we had all kinds of mobility, and we could move without any interruption. Whereas we came to a screeching halt in the Hurtgen Forest. Now, I don't know what the strategy was. Obviously, it was misplaced. But it's well recognized that that was a real mistake. None of the generals were involved, I'm sure, would want to recognize that, but we had heavy casualties in that Hurtgen Forest. In the month of November, we lost thousands and thousands of men, all because of the conditions that we had to fight in. And the Germans had the advantage of having us in that forest, so that's another aspect. You know, there's another little thing that we used to do, which is rather humorous. On the front lines, we would say, you know, if we're as screwed up as we are, we're winning this war. Imagine how bad it must be in the German army. when they're losing to us and we're so screwed up, that we're winning. But it was a combat type joke, you know, combat. Not anything meant disloyal in a disloyal fashion, but rather it relieves some of the tension to inject a little bit of humor into it. Any other question or suggestion or an experience that somebody has had that might be of interest to the entire audience? If not, I say.
Have you been to Bedford, Virginia?
Sorry?
Bedford, Virginia, for the memorial, D-Day memorial?
Oh, I've never. Have you asked me if I've been?
Yeah.
No. No. I'll bet that's something. No. I've never been to the World War II memorial in Washington either. Right? That's built, isn't it? It's, built. Still in the process of being built. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. When is it going to be dedicated, Bill? Do you know?
In May of 1904.
Oh.
Of 2000.
Next Memorial Day.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Next
Next
Memorial Day
Memorial Day,
weekend.
yeah.
Oh, really? Of 2004? Yeah, I see. Okay, that's supposed to, with all the controversy that's preceded the location and the building of that memorial, I didn't know whether it had happened or not. Okay, well, thanks again, folks. It was a pleasure to be here.
Before we